Okay, so I want to look at this example of React and Express talking to each other in a scenario where we are doing, we're submitting a URL and some fetching happens on the back end. Let's start on the front end first, because that's how the user would interface with it. So all of my code is in an app.tsx file. I shared this repo with you, and I would invite you to clone it so that you can see it working on your computer. Okay. This is like very brittly made. It's like a lot of poor decisions were made to just have a quick and dirty demo. So I have hard coded the URL of the server, which is localhost 3000. And then there's one endpoint. It's going to be at API images. So all this app is going to do is find what all the images are on the given website, web page, and then show you what all the images are with just a little bit of information. And it's not even that good of an information. So on my front end, my main piece of state is the page URL and the data that I'm going to get back from the API. For anything that you're doing fetching, then you generally want to have a is loading state and an error state so that you can show the user, I'm loading right now, or this is the error that was returned. Okay, this is the essence of what we're going to do. So skipping over all the error checking. We're going to send an await message to our endpoint, which is at localhost 3000 API images. It's a post. I'll put a couple headers in, but most importantly is the application JSON. I'm saying the data that I'm sending you in the body of this message is in JSON. And to make sure it is, I'm going to convert my URL with the value. Like I'm going to convert this JSON object. It's just an object that has a URL colon and a value. We'll convert that to JSON, stringifying. I guess I'm really converting the JSON to a string to write it into this packet. So that's the glue that sends a message, a request from the client to the server. Yes. And this is specific. This is the URL to any site, any page I want to analyze. fsu.edu, wordle.com, whatever. Okay. I'm going to get back as long as my response is okay. Right. So handle the errors here, but as long as it's okay, I'm going to. Notice up here too. Hang on. I'm awaiting this fetch call because it is going to take a while to send that post message up and then get a response back. The response that I get back, I expect it to be in JSON, and I'm going to un-JSONify it to get a JSON object, kind of populate it back into a full object, and then set my data to this thing, to this piece of JSON that came back. Okay, so at this point, let's jump to the server and see what it's going to see before we render what got returned. So this is in the backend folder, and there's a server.js. I've got several different libraries here on the backend. Express, we know Express. Axios is a library that handles fetching. I really don't need it, but ChatGPT really wants to use it. I would rather just use fetch. Cheerio is a library that parses and manages the interacting with HTML. This is what you should be using, not regex. There's no reason for that. This is going to make it easy. Got this URL object, and I've got this CORS object. CORS is a cross-origin resource sharing. I think that's right. Basically, there's something built in for security reasons where one website can't send a request to another website kind of like on the same server unless it's allowed. Oh. feel like that's probably different, but this is maybe in the same security umbrella. So basically, for the setup we have, where we have our website, but when we're running this in dev mode on 2 different ports, if you're running 2 apps on 2 different ports, those look like completely different computers. And there's some security mechanism built in that says you can't run one website from 2 different computers unless the server is allowing it. Because you might not want to just open it up and let everybody use your server as their server. But that's what I'm doing, just to make it easy for dev mode. In the real, when I actually deploy this, I would probably have the front end and the back end run on the same server, potentially. All right. Okay. So I'm going to try to go over the magical parts of this, but you see here, here's my app.post. This looks familiar, right? Oops, app.post. I'm expecting when I hit API images, I have this asynchronous request response method that runs through. I'm going to extract the page URL as a URL. I've got the URL, the string, I got it out of the body. You seeing that? So I destructure it from the body. The body is in JSON. I try to create a page URL, to basically instantiate a URL object from this. If I have some weird thing that's not really a URL, then I'll get this. If I were to type in https:// Ethan's mom, that's not a real URL. There wasn't a .com. Okay. This is Axios doing it. We could do it with fetch. You see here, I'm getting the page URL .toString, and I'm seeing the GET request do that. I'm awaiting that response. So this is the way my server is browsing, as it were, loading a remote page and bringing that data back. Axios is a library that does web access. So we've used fetch, I think. Axios, fetch didn't always used to be in the browser, or it was different in different browsers. And Axios made it simple to do this kind of stuff. I mean, one thing you see here, they've got a max redirects. So there's there's some complexity here. It could be even behind the scenes that you say you want, even if you had a URL shortener, then the URL actually redirects you to a different URL, which could redirect. So this at least gives you some control over, do you want to follow redirects, how long, okay? And it also here specifies, I've got what my user agent is. This is just a user agent. Like this isn't a real browser that's browsing this. So they've made this up. I'm also saying that I really want HTML back. This is the accept tag for that. Okay, on the whole, I'm going to get back a chunk of text, which is this response.data. And what's in response.data should be, excuse me, the HTML for that page. I'm going to load the Cheerio object with that HTML string. So at this moment, what's in HTML is just a big long string of text that happens to be in the HTML language. This $, which is like the Cheerio object, lets me iterate, traverse over that. Really, it's a tree structure. Remember, tree? The top is going to be, there's going to be like an HTML node, which has a head and a body. Under the body, there's going to be all of the HTML elements, which could be even sub. It's basically, yeah, it gives us a way to parse the model. It also gives us a way to filter it. So you see right here, this $img will select just the image tags, the image elements. And then I can, after getting all those elements, I can for each over them by saying .each. And then within this function, I can, as I'm iterating, get the index, so what number of the thing I'm on, and this is the actual element that I'm on. So for the element that I'm on, I'm going to create basically a Cheerio object which represents that image. When I make it a Cheerio object, then I can extract the source or source set attribute out of that image. Source is what we're used to. If it happens to be the case that this image doesn't have a source, we skip it. That's interesting. This extracts out the alt, the width, the height, the title, the loading, these different attributes if they exist. You understand this or null. It means if you can't find that, then just make it null. So this does this nice thing of creating an absolute source, which the absolute source is what page am I on, and then what's, no, sorry. That seems backwards to me. Source B. Source has got to be what we extracted out of the. Apparently not. Let's see. No, it's also getting this parsed source set. So here, this is a bunch of data. So I'm getting the index, which numbered image is it, what's the source of this image, what was in the source attribute. This absolute source would be like www.example.com/images/folder name /image3.png. Whereas this would just be image3.png or /images.png. I'm going to send back the alt, the width, the height, title, loading, source set, if that's a thing. And notice this is images.push, meaning images is an array. So I'm creating this information about all the images. When I'm all the way done iterating all of those, I've processed all those image elements, then I'm going to send back as a JSON object the page that I analyzed, the number of images, and this big honking images array of these objects that have all of these things. So I've gotten kind of a pretty comprehensive analysis summary of all of the image data. So back to my server, back to my client, when I get this data, this really isn't really TypeScripted, but the data that I get back is in this shape. All right, so now when I display this data, here we go, I can say data.page URL, so that should be where I got it from. I can get my data.image count, this is how many images there were. And then data.images.map, I can iterate over this and extract out what numbered image was this, what was its source, what was its, what is the image. So I have a bunch more stuff that I didn't put in here. ChatGPT didn't put in here, but we have a bunch more than that. Oh, I've got this function image card. That's cool. Oh, that actually has all this information that I could show. Okay, so now let's run it and see what it does. So let's see, pwd. Here, I'm going to start this from scratch. So I'm going to say cd into front end. And in front end, I'm going to say npm run dev to run this Vite project. So this is localhost 5174. We'll go ahead and open that. You see it looks like this. I can try this right now, but I can guarantee you it's going to fail. So I can put in www.fhu.edu, extract images. It failed to fetch because the API server isn't running. So let's fix that. I'm going to create a new terminal. I like this way better. And then I'm going to cd into the backend. So I'm going to have, I am really running two separate apps. They happen to be able to talk to each other. I have them in the same folder structure, but I can start and stop them separately. Actually, I want to see, do I have in here, oh, there is no start. There's no start? There's no start. Let's do start. The start script should probably be something like node server.js. And I'm pretty sure there's a -- watch. I learned about this later. I need a comma here. Yes. So I think a long time ago, NodeMon, watch didn't exist it wasn't a part of Node. node mod was the way to do that. But now it's basically built in for the most part. So let me see if this works. If I say npm run start, and then just a test, I'm going to like add a space and click save. Oh, I don't think I did anything. I would have thought they would have done something. Well, let's check it. So now when I click it again, extract images, it says analyzing page. It says 46 images. Can you see that? It's a white Freed-Hardeman University logo. There's a search bar. There's an X. There's another X. There's another X. Why are there so many X's? Are they really at different? That's weird, isn't it? It's under website resources, SVG, FHU-icon-x.svg. Oh, maybe there weren't that many of them. Well, oh, if that's used multiple times on the page, it's going to show up. I'm not looking at unique images. I'm looking at how many times was it. So anytime that there was an X, yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So got these background. You seeing this? Like those are the images on the Freed-Hardeman homepage. It shows the alt tag, which is cool. Looks like there's a way to, oh, you can say load this in a lazy way, which I think means something like, it's like, do you load it before it's viewed? Or maybe before the user gets to the page? Yeah. Sorry, it is like in a grid, but it didn't center the whole thing. Is this working for y'all? So I always default to fhu.edu. We could do something else. Nima, what's the esports page? FHU esports. Looks like it's gofhulions.com/sports/esports. If you went to, if you signed in, I think what would be happening is your browser has the information that you're signed in, like it has a cookie. A cookie is just a file on in your browser that it would include with the subsequent requests. Our backend does not have your cookies. So you're going to look like an unlogged in user. So it would be protected just like that. Did I? This? Nope. That's all I see there. Yeah. It could be that we can, if this data were generated in JavaScript, like a React app, this isn't going to work because what React is doing, if we have a React app, the page does, like this HTML doesn't exist until the whole page object gets loaded in a browser, and then the browser runs the JavaScript, and the JavaScript creates the page. You with me? And for what we're doing, we are not simulating a browser. We're just simulating a fetch. So if it did work that way, which I don't know, I don't know, kind of surprised they're doing that. We would, if the data is being dynamically generated in any way, then this approach is not going to work. So my question is, do they use any kind of React? I guess that would be at the bottom. There is this I bet that iframe is my stuff. The bottom of the body is where you would normally include JavaScript. Yeah, I don't know, JT. Let's see, require min.js. Why is it that? So, like, in the end, this is the page that's rendered. My guess is that that page hasn't been generated, and our code would only look that. I mean, we could actually. You want to see it? Let's see what's going on the server. It's not that one. On the server, not that one. Here. Let's just log what we got back. Yeah, after the response. So we could just, this is going to look ugly, but we could put this print this HTML out that we got. I'm curious about that. This. Note when I do that, that's going to be printed out in the server's log, not the. I did watch wrong. Okay, hang on. I bet it's like, it's something simple, I bet. Like there's just one dash or something. Does the watch have to be first? Let's try it. Here. I did npm run start, right? Hang on. Okay, well that's working now because now when I press add a space and click save, it does it. So let's go back to this and do that. Let's see what we get. So this is all the HTML that it got back. And I think what I'm seeing is you see this KO? KO is, I think, this framework called Knockout, which is like kind of a React competitor. So that page is being generated using JavaScript. So does it make sense why there aren't any IMGs yet? Because, or at least they're not the IMGs that we're looking. I bet they'd be empty IMGs if they're there. Because even if they're in here, yeah, it wouldn't have it. Okay. There is a way around this. I saw this when I was looking into how to do PageRank. On the server, you can actually instantiate a small Chrome browser, like programmatically, and then have that Chrome browser browse your page, which will then resolve all the React or whatever dynamically generated content, and then get back the final version of the page and analyze that. But you then basically have to run your whole another. You have to run Chrome inside of Node. Does that make sense? Feels a little inception-y. But that way you actually get what a browser would have processed this to be, so that then you could analyze the final HTML CSS. Okay, so that may be more than you wanted to know. What I wanted you to see was how we can create a front end that sends this information to the back end. The back end does this work, and it sends back this structured response, a JSON object, which we receive in our TSX, and then we extract out the data that we want. So like apparently I have width and height, and it never shows it, or does it? Well, it should say, it says dimensions here. Does that mean that none of these have width and height? That must be what it means. Remember how you can set the width and height attributes of an image? We don't usually do that. We just let it be the intrinsic size of the image. Yeah, so this must mean, yeah, because it's included, there just aren't any widths or heights on any of those images. You know that the image file itself actually has a width and a height. And the code that I shared in that thing from last time, if you were, or 2 times ago, it actually saves the image locally and then opens the image and can inspect to see what its actual width, height are. Okay.
So what we probably know is getting React.
I mean, on the whole, you don't even have to know how to use Cheerio that well. If you know how to use ChatGPT or Claude, you can say, write a Cheerio, find all of the images and extract their blah, 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 blah using Cheerio. I feel like, yeah, that concept is. So if then, to me, like once you have something that's generally in place, you could say, oh, actually, I also want to return this particular thing, I don't know, in my data set. So then I'm going to tweak this and extract it and then include it in the thing that's coming back. Oh, thank you. What, did you not read my thing that I sent out? Wait, what? Okay.
As ready.
No, thank you for bringing it up. Uh, I was just reading this today. Separate Express app routes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. I don't think you don't have to have these controllers and models. This example is like the most separated as possible. But notice this. There's an app.js. There's a server.js because they've already even separated out starting the server from like running the app. I would probably even merge those. But then there's a routes folder. And the routes folder has an index.js, and then it has the split files for different routes. These are routes that have to do with the user object. These are routes that have to do with the post object. Now, I will say for what we're doing, I guess we could just say each group, you're really just making one route, aren't you? No, you're making more than one. But really, you could just say there's an open graph set of routes, and there's a alt tag set of routes, and there's a lighthouse set. So notice how this works. All right, so here's our app. This is where we do our global setup. So we're used to this. So we've got our Express, we've got our cores, create the app. All right, here's the magic, part of the magic. So we're going to say that this file depends on, it brings in whatever's in /routes/index. If you don't say the name of a file, you just say a folder name like this, it resolves to .index.js. Okay. So now we have this routes object that is essentially just a shortcut to index.js. We say all of our route objects, or no, what's in index.js is going to get, I'll say, mounted at /API. The cool thing here is they've also put this error handling middleware at the very, very bottom. So this says if you, basically all of your errors end up following down here. If you trigger an error, if an error happens, it can get caught with this one. Okay, so notice there's no app.get, app.post, app.delete, app.put. All of those are in individual files. So let me show you the individual files and then show you the middle layer. So this is user routes JS. We would have something that's like alt tag routes JS or TS. Still we require express. Don't ignore these for now. We say router equals express.router, and then we export the router from this file. So it's like we've got this little router object that we can plug in later on. This is where we actually would say, instead of app.get, it's router.get. So these are our different routes. They've separated this out so that instead of even writing the logic here, they wrote the logic to get the list of users in what they're calling a controller. So the controller, if you split it this much, does the, you just have a bunch of functions that doesn't know about routes. Does that make sense how it's separating into these slices of, this is the only file where you actually have, say this is the get, and this is get for slash. In here, you've written a function that just returns all the users from the database as a regular old JavaScript function. And then in here, now we're saying, call that function with slash. I'm saying for what we're doing, I would just merge the controller into this and put this logic directly in here. They've also added this optional middle parameter, not optional, this middle parameter, where it's like your authentication level saying anybody can do this, anybody can do this, but you've got to be you've got to have a authentication. I think it should have also been here. If you're going to add a new thing or change a new thing or delete, you got to be logged in to do that. Okay, so notice we exported the router, and these are all the users' routes. Okay, so here's the middle layer, which is the index.js of routes. So we again get express. We pull in all of our individual routers, create a router object again, and then say router.use. So here's the magic that this says, if anybody requests anything at /users, use the users router definition of routes. If anybody requests anything at /posts, use the post router. Now these things kind of like accumulate. So because the index router was mounted, it was used at /API, then it'd be /API /users / would be this one. If it was /API /users and then you gave an ID, it would match this one. If it was if it was API users, well, if this was still just an ID, post, patch, delete, it would match down here. If you went to /API /posts, then you'd match the index route on the post object. Do you see how it kind of accumulates the URL parts? They also here put a health check in the API that just returns status OK. So think about what route would this be at? What URL would this be at? This one right here. Yes. Does it make sense how they got different files and then the way you kind of piece them together? And you don't and you can't define what came before you. Like you can't not be in the API folder when this is structured like this, because this index route was mounted at /API. Yeah, yeah. I have seen this. I like this variation better, honestly. Some people would put like all the controllers in one place and all the routes in another place. But in this one, they've defined models, which would be like kind of your data objects that represent a user or a post, which is sort of like types as well. They put all the user stuff together, as opposed to organizing all the routes together, all the controllers together, all the services together, all the models together. Another thing that I hadn't talked about, but that is really good form, and really you should just do it. We should just do it. On your, when you design your API, maybe I did talk about this, you should put /API/v1/users or whatever. And that way, if in the future you decide, I don't like the way we design this at all, I want to completely change the way this API works, you can make a v2, change whatever you want to change, and then make your new code point to v2. And you don't break any old code that might still be out there using v1. Do you see what I mean? And if you don't have v1 in the title, I mean, because you can just add v2, but then you're like tightly coupled. And when you change anything that's on the back end, you have to change the front end too. Whatever. This would be especially important if you had native mobile apps like phone apps that then have hard coded in them the API endpoints that they're gonna load the users or the posts from /API/v1, and you can't change that on the user's phone until they update their app. Does that make sense? So even if you release a new app, you can't force people to upgrade. And if you were to just change your backend server, then you could break existing apps, and you never want to do that. So they really I guess I see them as professional developers, although it feels excessive to me, keeping routes really, really thin. So you have, like you saw here, a lot of one-line things. That's like in here, where all the logic of how to list the users or get a user by ID or update a user or delete a user is in a different file that's focused on just doing that operation with no consideration of this is running on a web server and is receiving API requests and sending back responses. Does that make sense? All that is just completely gone. Here's their example of a controller where the controller is the logic that we're used to. So like if this were like something like Prisma, this is where we do the Prisma stuff to connect to the database, get the users, filter the users. They're still doing a res.json though, and they're still sending back the users. So it's not quite as separated as one could do. Okay.
Well, you would still have.
Yeah. But then I guess too, you've got to know, like, whether it's a 404 or a 500, you don't know until down here to know there's no user with that ID versus we can't connect to the database. Like the database is down. So that would be a different 500 error. So that, have you seen this next pattern before? When you say next error, you're passing the error object to the next function in line. And that's middleware, which in this example, you remember at the very top level, the very last route, here it is. So it's as if all those things are in order. And you could always call next. When you call next, it would pass on to the next chunk of code in the queue of code chunks that are they're middleware, that are gonna do some operation on the current request. We have been recording this, yes. So that's what's a little bit different, because sometimes, where do they do that? For things like this authentication, they've just given us the idea here. If we've said this is like a middleware that checks authentication. So if you're logged in, you do whatever logic is, you need the logic for this, and then say, hey, if you're not authenticated, then you send back a 404 and you call next. Whereas optional here, you're like saying, if this was an optional route, just pass it on to the next. Don't do any checking whatsoever. So what they did here, which this is another syntax. If your .get method has 3 parameters, the first one is the route string. The second one is like the middleware that you want to call first, and then the third one is the actual function to do the processing. I think people would say this is a thing they like about Node, is that it makes it easy to put these different middleware chunks of logic together, and you don't have to do everything just in one chunk of code. You see here how we've pulled out the authentication slice to its own little module, and then just said, hey, go through this module. And you can actually chain those together, I believe. Yeah. Yes. So like a common middleware that we should probably just turn on because everybody does it is Morgan. Morgan is a logger. So that doesn't mean he cuts down trees. That's not that kind of logger. So it makes it really easy. I don't even think, here you go. You say app.use Morgan, and then you can put it in a particular mode. And then you'll see it'll log really informative lines every time your API gets any traffic, anytime it gets any request. So you can see like the date, the time, what API endpoint was hit, which would really help you debug. I'm sure they have a production level as well where it's the kind of logs you would want to keep. In production, you also, for the sake of like auditability and security, you want to log what's happened so you can trace down and figure out why the thing broke, if it broke, or if you were hacked. So I know we haven't done a lot of that. We've just like done console.log. This is the more professional way of doing that, to turn on this logging system that then injects itself into the middleware and sends out a bunch of information. I mean, it's got super configurable, but even without thinking, you could just do these 2 lines and have a very professional logging system. I guess we could just turn it on. Let's turn it on and see what it looks like on our server. So I'm going to do this. Oh, probably do. I need to npm I Morgan because that's not installed. Then run that again. Am I still console.logging that? Yeah. Which? Oh, you're right. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that's got to turn that on. So I want to say app.use Morgan. And apparently there's a bunch of different formats here. Let's see what it does. I would think it's not going to do anything until I hit it. So it does show me there was a post to /API images that returned to 200. It took 412 milliseconds. And I don't know what 2832 means. Is that the amount of data that it sent back? I don't know. Now I kind of want to see what are the other modes. Prod? I would call it prod. Prod? I don't think that's the right word. Is there nothing? Okay, there you see this. So this is like everything. This is a traditional log. So this has got the exact date time that there was a post message to this URL. It was HTTP 1.1. It returned to 200. You see all this? This is who it came from, this device, running this browser. Yeah. Hope you'll have a great weekend /break. I've decided to cancel class next week Y'all use your time. Just take a couple days for yourself and recoup, all right? I'll see you guys on Monday.